It's a funny thing, dusting. You're not just clearing away the cobwebs from your home, you're clearing them from your memory, too. Each object you pick up has a story to tell, doesn't it? This morning, I was tackling the big bookshelf in the living room. It's a job I put off. You know, so many books, so many ghosts. My hands, which are more suited to holding a teacup than a dust rag these days, were carefully wiping down the spines when I reached for a book on the very top shelf. It's been up there for years. It's a small, unassuming volume bound in dark green leather. Its title, Selected Poems, embossed in faded gold. I ran the cloth over it, and my fingers traced the worn edges. I pulled it down, a little puff of dust dancing in the sunbeam that cut across the room. The book fell open in my hands to the flyleaf, as it always does. And there, in elegant, slanted handwriting, was an inscription in ink the color of a faded violet. It reads, "For Eleanor, may you always find your own voice. Double quotes, oh dear." Just seeing that single initial, my heart does a little flutter kick, the way it did all those years ago. For Isabella. She was a friend of mine, though that word seems too small, too simple for what she was. She was more like a window in a room I didn't even know was sealed shut, letting in a blast of fresh, brilliant, terrifying air. This book was her greatest gift to me. It wasn't just a collection of poems, it was a key to a part of myself I had locked away without even realizing it. And it takes me back to 1968, a time of great change in the world, but not, I had thought, in my small, predictable life. Back then, my world was a tidy little box. I was married to Frank, a good, solid man who worked at the bank. He was predictable as the tides, and I found great comfort in that. We had our first child, a little boy, and we lived in a neat semi-detached house with a rosebush by the front door. My days were a gentle, repeating rhythm of housework, childcare, and preparing dinner for Frank's return at precisely 6 o'clock. My life was nice. It was comfortable. It was what every girl of my generation was brought up to want. And yet, sometimes, in the quiet moments when the baby was sleeping and the house was still, I'd feel a strange, hollow ache, a feeling of, is this all there is? A longing for something I couldn't even name. It was into this quiet, ordered world that Isabella Thorne arrived. She moved into the little cottage at the end of our lane, the one that had been empty for years, and from the moment she arrived, she was the subject of endless, hushed gossip. For a start, she was unmarried, and in her early 30s, which was a curiosity in itself back then. She didn't work a normal job. She was a writer, a translator of French literature, apparently. She didn't dress like the other women in our town. She wore trousers, for heaven's sake, and colorful scarves in her dark, untamed hair. She didn't attend church, and she had strange visitors, artilly-tilking people from London who drove loud, sputtering cars. The town collectively decided she was a bohemian, a word they used with a mixture of suspicion and fascination. She was an outsider, a strange, exotic bird that had landed in a flock of pigeons, and no one quite knew what to make of her. I watched her from a distance, from behind my lace curtains, as she worked in her garden or walked home with a basket full of books from the library. There was an air of self-possession about her, a confidence that I found both intimidating and deeply intriguing. I remember the first time we spoke. I was in the small local library, trying to quiet my fussing son, when I dropped a book. As I bent to pick it up, another hand reached it at the same time. It was hers. "Allow me," she said, her voice lower and richer than I'd expected. She looked me right in the eye, with a directness that was startling. Most people's gazes just skated over me. Another young housewife. Hers seemed to see more. "It's hard to juggle, isn't it?" she said, nodding at my son and the book. "The life of the body and the life of the mind." I was so taken aback, I could only stammer a reply. The life of the mind. No one had ever spoken to me like that. We chatted for a few minutes, about the book I was borrowing, about the weather. It was a simple conversation, but it felt significant. It felt like I was being seen, not as a wife or a mother, but as a person, an individual. That brief encounter planted a seed. I found myself thinking about her, about the phrase she'd used, the life of the mind. I had a mind. I knew that. I'd done well in school, but since getting married, I'd packed it away, like my school certificates, in a box in the attic. It didn't seem necessary for the life I was living. But that brief conversation with Isabella had reminded me it was still there. and it was hungry. I didn't know it yet, but my tidy little box of a life was about to have a window smashed right through it, and I would be the one holding the stone. A week or so after our meeting in the library, I was walking home from the shops when I saw Isabella in her front garden, wrestling with a particularly stubborn rosebush. On an impulse that felt both brave and foolish, I stopped at her gate. "That one's always been a terror," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally high. "My mum used to say it had more thorns than a saint has trials." She looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. A slow smile spread across her face. "Apt," she said with a laugh. "Would you like some help, or just to offer poetic encouragement?" Then she added, "Come in for a cup of tea. The roses can wait. I can't bear to battle them alone." I hesitated, for only a moment. Frank wouldn't be home for hours. My son was asleep in his prom. "I'd love to," I said. Walking into her cottage was like stepping into another world. My house was neat, ordered, and impersonal. Hers was a riot of color, books, and creative chaos. Books weren't just on shelves. They were piled on the floor, on chairs, on every available surface. There were strange, abstract paintings on the walls, a gramophone in the corner with a record still on the turntable, and the air smelled of coffee, paper, and something exotic, like incense. It wasn't messy, not exactly. It was lived in. It was the home of a mind that was too busy exploring to worry about tidiness. She made us tea in mismatched mugs, and we sat at her cluttered kitchen table. The conversation flowed so easily. It was as if we were picking up a discussion we'd been having for years. She didn't ask me about my husband's job or my baby's sleeping schedule, the usual currency of conversation among the women I knew. She asked me what I thought about the book she'd seen me with, about a news story in the paper, about a poem she'd been struggling to translate. At first, I was shy, my opinions rusty from disuse. "Oh, I don't really know," I'd say, but she was patient. She'd look at me with those intelligent, curious eyes and wait, and slowly, tentatively, I began to answer. I began to share the thoughts I normally kept to myself. I felt a part of my brain switching on, the lights coming up in a room that had been dark for a very long time. It was exhilarating. That cup of tea became a regular thing. Once or twice a week, I would find an excuse to walk down her lane. I'd tell Frank I was visiting another mother from a playgroup, or running an extra errand. It wasn't a lie, not completely, but it was an omission, a careful editing of my life. I knew, instinctively, that he wouldn't understand. Frank was a good man, but his world was one of facts and figures, of ledgers and bank statements. He saw books as a frivolous pastime and deep conversations as a waste of good energy. My friendship with Isabella belonged to a world he couldn't, and wouldn't want to, enter. Isabella became my secret university. She would lend me books, not just novels, but books of philosophy, history, and poetry. She introduced me to the music of people I'd never heard of, strange, soulful music that spoke to a part of me I didn't know existed. We would talk for hours, debating, laughing, sharing secrets. I told her about the vague sense of longing I felt, the feeling of being a supporting character in my own life. She didn't offer easy answers. She just listened and understood. "Many women feel that way, Eleanor," she said once, her voice gentle. "We're given a script. It takes a great deal of courage to write your own lines. This book, this very one I'm holding now, was one of the first she gave me. Start here," she'd said, pressing it into my hands. "Poetry is like a secret code to the heart. It says the things we don't have words for." I would read it at night, after Frank was asleep, a little torch under the covers like a naughty schoolgirl. The words of these long-dead poets resonated with my own unspoken feelings, and I felt a profound sense of connection, of not being alone in the world. My life had split in two. There was my public life, the dutiful wife, the loving mother, the pleasant neighbor, and then there was my secret life, the woman who sat in Isabella's messy kitchen, drinking coffee and talking about Simone de Beauvoir, the woman whose mind was crackling with new ideas, new questions. I was happier than I had been in years, but my happiness was shadowed by a growing sense of unease. I was living a lie, a small one, but a lie nonetheless. And I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that secrets have a way of coming to light, and I had no idea what would happen when mine did. The changes in me were subtle at first, but Frank began to notice. It started with small things. One evening, He was reading the newspaper and made a dismissive comment about some student protests. Back in the day, I would have just nodded or said nothing, but this time, fortified by a long conversation with Isabella about that very topic, I said, "Well, I think they have a point. Sometimes you have to make a noise to be heard." Frank lowered his paper and looked at me over the top of his glasses. "What's that?" he asked, a hint of amused disbelief in his voice. "Where did you get a silly idea like that?" "It's not silly, Frank," I said, my cheeks flushing. "It's just a different way of looking at things." He just grunted and went back to his paper, but a seed of suspicion had been planted. He started to make little jokes about my reading. "Got your nose in a book again, have we? Don't get too many funny ideas, now." He wasn't being cruel, not really. He was just a man of his time, and my newfound opinions were like a piece of furniture moved out of its proper place. It was unsettling to him. The real trouble started when the town gossip began to filter back to him. His colleagues at the bank, their wives, they all had something to say about the strange woman at the end of our lane. "Heard your wife's been spending time with that Thorne woman," his manager said to him one day, disguised as a friendly comment. "Bit of an odd bird, isn't she?" That evening, Frank came home with a dark cloud over his face. He didn't mention it straight away. He waited until after dinner, after I'd put our son to bed. He was standing by the fireplace, staring into the flames. "Eleanor," he began, his voice tight, "people are talking." My heart began to beat a little faster. "Talking? What about?" "About you. And this, Isabella Thorne." He said her name as if it left a bad taste in his mouth. "But say you're always over at her cottage. What on earth do you find to talk to her about for hours on end?" "We talk about books," I said, my voice small. "Music. Things like that. Things like that," he repeated, turning to face me. His face was a mixture of confusion and frustration. "Look, Ellie, I don't like it. She's not our kind of person. She's strange. People think it's odd, you being so friendly with her. It reflects badly on us, on me." I was stung by the injustice of it. "Because she's different, because she reads books and has opinions. We're not doing anything wrong, Frank. We're just friends." It's not a proper friendship," he insisted, his voice rising. "A married woman with a child, and a bohemian spinster like her. It's not right. I don't want you seeing her anymore." The words hung in the air between us, stark and absolute. An order, a line drawn in the sand. I stared at him, my mind reeling. I felt a surge of anger so intense it took my breath away. How dare he? How dare he try to control not just my actions, but my mind, my friendships? By the way, dear, this part of the story always makes my chest feel tight. It's a terrible feeling to have someone you love try to put you in a cage, even if they think it's for your own good. It makes me wonder about you, listening to this. I hope you have people in your life who let you be your true self. Where are you listening from? What time is it there? It's a comfort to think of you. Let me know in the comments below, if you'd be so kind. It makes this old woman feel a little less like she's just talking to herself. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. Frank's ultimatum. "You can't do that," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "You can't forbid me from seeing my friend." "I can," he said, his jaw set stubbornly. "I am your husband, and I am telling you, I forbid it. I want you to promise me you'll stop." We were at an impasse. He saw it as a simple matter of protecting his family's reputation and his wife's propriety. I saw it as an attack on the very core of who I was becoming. It wasn't just about Isabella anymore. It was about my right to have a thought in my own head, a friend of my own choosing. The argument went on late into the night, a circular, painful battle of wills. He could not understand why I was being so difficult, and I could not make him see that he was asking me to cut off a part of myself. Finally, exhausted and heartbroken, I gave him a non-committal answer, a weak promise to think about it. But I knew what I was thinking. I was standing at a crossroads. On one path was peace in my home, a quiet life, my husband's approval. On the other path was me, the person I was discovering, the person who felt alive and engaged with the world for the first time in years. To choose one meant betraying the other. And as I lay in bed that night, listening to Frank's steady breathing beside me, I felt a terrible, lonely sense of dread. My secret world and my real world had collided, and I was standing right in the middle of the wreckage. In the days that followed our fight, a cold war descended upon our house. Frank was politely distant, treating me with a sort of careful, wounded courtesy that was worse than outright anger. He was waiting, I knew, for me to capitulate, to tell him that I had come to my senses and ended my unsuitable friendship. The silence at the dinner table was thick with unspoken expectations. And, I'm ashamed to say, I tried. I really did. The thought of a life of constant conflict with my husband was unbearable. He was a good man, after all. He was a good father. He provided for us. Was one friendship, however stimulating, worth jeopardizing the peace of my entire family? So, I tried to pull away from Isabella. I stopped visiting her cottage. I'd walk the long way home from the shops to avoid her lane. If I saw her in the distance, I would duck into a shop or cross the street, my heart thumping with guilt. I felt like a coward, and I hated myself for it. The world, which had seemed to be opening up in glorious color, began to shrink back to its familiar shades of gray. The books on my nightstand seemed to mock me. The intellectual spark that Isabella had ignited sputtered and dimmed. I went back to being the person I was before, quiet, agreeable, my opinions safely tucked away. And the hollow ache returned, deeper and more painful than before, because now I knew exactly what I was missing. Frank noticed the change, of course, and was pleased. He became warmer, more affectionate. He thought he had won, that the problem was solved. He brought me a small bunch of flowers one evening. "There's my girl," he said, kissing my cheek. "Everything's back to normal." I smiled and thanked him, but inside I felt a cold knot of resentment. This wasn't normal. This was a surrender. About 2 weeks into my self-imposed exile, I ran into Isabella at the post office. There was no escape. She was standing in line right in front of me. When she turned and saw me, her face lit up with a genuine, warm smile. "Eleanor, I was just thinking about you. I was beginning to think you'd fallen off the face of the earth." My cheeks burned with shame. "No, I've just been busy," I mumbled, unable to meet her gaze. "The baby's been a bit under the weather." She looked at me, her intelligent eyes searching my face. She knew I was lying. Isabella was not one for pretense. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her voice soft with genuine concern. "You know you can tell me if it's not." "Everything's fine," I insisted, my voice brittle. "Just life." She was quiet for a moment, her expression one of sad understanding. "I see," she said, and the way she said it told me that she did, indeed, see everything. She saw my fear, my husband's disapproval, the invisible cage I was trapped in. "Well," she continued, her tone gentle, "I won't keep you. Just know that I finished translating that book of poems we were talking about. I left a copy on your doorstep this morning. No need to return it, it's a gift." And then it was her turn at the counter, and our conversation was over. I rushed home, my heart pounding. There on the front step, wrapped in brown paper, was the book. It was this book, this very one. I tore off the paper, my hands shaking, and saw her inscription inside. "For Eleanor, may you always find your own voice." It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a demand. It was a wish. A wish for my freedom. A freedom I was too cowardly to claim for myself. I sank down onto the hallway stairs, the book clutched to my chest, and I wept. I wept for my own weakness. I wept for the wonderful, enlivening friendship I was throwing away. I wept for the disapproval of my husband, a man I loved but who did not understand a fundamental part of me. And I wept for the woman I was meant to be, a woman who felt like she was suffocating, slowly and silently, in the quiet comfort of her own home. The window Isabella had opened was closing, and I was the one letting it happen. The silence in my house was no longer peaceful. It was the sound of my own spirit giving up. The weeks that followed were some of the bleakest of my young life. I had made my choice, it seemed. I had chosen peace in my marriage over the life of my mind. I put Isabella's book on the highest shelf, a symbol of a part of myself that was now out of reach. I was polite and dutiful to Frank. I was a loving mother to my son. I was a ghost in my own home, my inner world boarded up and silent. The annual village fete was held in early summer, on the green. It was the social event of the year in our small town, a collection of bake sales, tombolas, and politely forced merriment. Frank, as a respected man at the bank, always played a role. That year, he was helping to run the coconut shop. I was tasked with contributing a cake to the Women's Institute stall. It was all so terribly, predictably normal. I saw Isabella as soon as we arrived. It was impossible to miss her. While the rest of us were in our modest floral summer dresses, she was wearing a striking, deep blue dress and a wide-brimmed straw hat. She wasn't trying to cause a stir, you understand. She was just being herself. But in our sea of beige conformity, being yourself was an act of rebellion. She was alone. She browsed the stalls with a quiet dignity, but I could see the invisible bubble around her. Other women would fall silent as she approached, their conversations resuming in whispers as soon as she had passed. Men would stare. It was a masterclass in social exclusion, cruel and efficient. My heart ached for her. I watched her from the safety of my position behind the cake stall, my stomach churning with a mixture of shame and pity. Frank saw her too, of course. He caught my eye from across the green and gave me a small, tight shake of his head. It was a clear, silent warning. Don't even think about it. I looked away, my cheeks burning. I felt like a child being admonished by a stern parent. Isabella bought a jar of homemade jam, and then, finding nowhere to sit, she walked to a quiet spot under an old oak tree at the edge of the green, away from the main crowd. She sat there, alone, a solitary, colorful figure against the green grass. She looked poised and graceful, but I could feel her isolation as if it were my own. She was being punished for being different, for being intelligent, for being independent, and I was one of the punishers, a silent accomplice in my own fear. I stood behind the cake stall, selling slices of Victoria sponge and lemon drizzle to the very people who were shunning my friend. I smiled, I made small talk, and inside, a slow, hot anger began to build. It was an anger at them, for their small-minded cruelty. It was an anger at Frank, for his fear and his controlling nature. But most of all, it was an anger at myself, at my own cowardice. What was I so afraid of? Gossip, a few awkward conversations, an argument with my husband. Was keeping the peace worth this slow death of my own integrity? I looked at Isabella, sitting alone under that tree, and I saw not an outcast, but a woman of immense strength and dignity. Then I looked at the book she had given me, the one on my top shelf at home. May you always find your own voice. My voice had been a terrified whisper for weeks, but in that moment, something inside me broke. It was a quiet snap, not a loud explosion. I took off the apron I was wearing, my hands moving with a calm deliberation that surprised me. I picked up a plate, placed the largest, most perfect slice of my lemon cake on it, and picked up a fork. Mrs. Higgins, the chairwoman of the WI, looked at me, surprised. "Where are you off to, Eleanor?" "I'm just taking a slice of cake to a friend," I said, my voice clear and steady. I could feel the eyes on me as I walked across the green. It felt like the longest walk of my life. I could feel Frank's stare, a hot poker on my back. I could feel the whispers rippling through the crowd. I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I didn't care what any of them thought. I reached the oak tree. Isabella looked up, her expression guarded, surprised. To see me approaching, I stopped in front of her and held out the plate. "I thought you might like some cake," I said. A slow, wondrous smile spread across her face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated understanding. She saw exactly what this simple act was costing me, what it meant. "Eleanor," she said, her voice soft, "thank you. I would love some." I sat down on the grass beside her, in full view of the entire town, and we shared a slice of cake. It was a small, quiet act of defiance, but it was my declaration of independence. I had found my voice, and though it trembled, I was finally using it. I knew there would be a battle waiting for me at home, but for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to fight it. The walk home from the fete was conducted in a silence so cold it felt like a physical wall between us. Frank walked a pace ahead of me, his back ramrod straight, his jaw clenched. I pushed the prom, my heart thumping a steady, defiant rhythm against my ribs. I knew the storm was coming. I had spent so long trying to avoid it, but now, having taken my stand, I felt strangely calm, ready to face it. As soon as we were through the front door, the storm broke. "How could you?" he demanded, whirling around to face me, his face flushed with anger. "How could you humiliate me like that, in front of everyone?" "I didn't humiliate you, Frank," I said, my voice quiet but firm. I took our sleeping son out of the prom and held him close, his small, warm body an anchor in the turbulence. "I had a piece of cake with a friend." "A friend," he scoffed, his voice dripping with scorn. "That woman is not your friend. She is a pariah, and you, my wife, chose to sit with her like a common spectacle. Did you see the way people were looking? They were looking at me. They were pitying me. If they were pitying you, I countered, it's because they have small, pitying minds. Isabella has been nothing but kind to me. She is intelligent and thoughtful, and she has been treated abominably by this town. I will not be a part of that. I will not be a coward. A coward, he roared, his voice louder than I had ever heard it. It is not cowardly to protect one's family. It is not cowardly to want a wife who is respectable, who doesn't make a public show of siding with the town eccentric. I put our son in his cot in the other room, my hands gentle, my movements deliberate. Then, I came back to face him. This isn't about respectability, Frank, and you know it, I said, my newfound voice surprising me with its strength. This is about control. You don't like Isabella because you don't understand her. You don't like her because she has encouraged me to have thoughts of my own, thoughts that don't align perfectly with yours. You are not afraid of me being friends with her. You are afraid of me. He stared at me, genuinely taken aback. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of something else, confusion, maybe even hurt. That's not true, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I pressed on, the words that had been locked inside me for so long, finally pouring out. I love you, Frank. I love our life, but I cannot be only a wife and a mother. I am also a person. I have a mind, and it needs nourishment just as my body does. My friendship with Isabella provides that. It doesn't take anything away from you. It makes me a better, happier person, a whole person. Why would you want to deny me that? Why would you want a wife who is only half of herself? We talked for hours that night, the first truly honest conversation of our marriage. It was painful. There were tears, and raised voices, and long, difficult silences. He confessed his insecurities, his fear that I would grow beyond him, that these new ideas would make me dissatisfied with the simple life he could offer. He felt threatened, he admitted, by a world he didn't understand. I, in turn, reassured him. My friendship with Isabella doesn't make me love you less, I explained, my voice softening. It just helps me love myself more. I don't want a different life, Frank. I just want to be more fully alive within this one. It was not a magical resolution. He didn't suddenly become a progressive, free-thinking man overnight. The habits of a lifetime, the societal pressures we were both under, were too strong for that. But for the first time, he listened. He didn't just hear the words. He listened to the meaning behind them. He saw my pain, and he saw my determination. And he saw that the quiet, agreeable woman he had married had a core of steel he hadn't known existed. In the end, exhausted, we reached a truce. A quiet, unspoken agreement. He would not forbid my friendship, and I, in turn, would be discreet, to not flaunt it in a way that made him uncomfortable. It wasn't a perfect solution. It was a compromise, a messy, human one, but it was a start. It was a crack in the wall of his certainty, a space for me to breathe. As I finally went to bed that night, the house was still, but it was a different kind of stillness. It wasn't the silence of surrender. It was the quiet after a storm, the calm that comes from speaking the truth, no matter how difficult. The window was open again, just a little, but it was enough to let the light in. Life after that night was different. The change was subtle, not something an outsider would notice, but it was profound for us. Frank never mentioned Isabella's name again with scorn. He didn't have to pretend to like her, but he stopped making dismissive comments. He had, in his own quiet way, accepted that she was a part of my life. The unspoken truce held. I would meet Isabella for our talks, and Frank would not ask where I had been. He had made space for a part of me he did not understand, and I loved him all the more for it. Our marriage became stronger, more honest. It was no longer built on the shaky foundation of my silent compliance, but on the bedrock of a hard-won, mutual respect. My friendship with Isabella flourished. It became a normal, accepted part of my week. She was a wonderful, unofficial aunt to my son, and later to my daughter when she was born. She would bring them strange, beautiful books and tell them stories that fired their imaginations. She taught me that friendship wasn't about having everything in common. It was about celebrating the differences, about learning from one another. A few years later, Isabella was offered a teaching position at a university in another city. It was a wonderful opportunity for her, a recognition of her brilliant mind. We were both sad to say goodbye, but it wasn't a tragic parting. Our friendship had done its work. She had come into my life when I needed her most. She hadn't rescued me, you see. She had simply held up a mirror until I could see myself clearly. She had helped me find my own voice. Her leaving was a test. Would I, without her constant presence, retreat back into my shell? But I didn't. The strength she had helped me find was my own, not borrowed from her. I continued to read. I joined a book club. I started taking evening classes at the local college when my children were older. I had conversations with Frank that were deeper and more challenging than we'd ever had before. He didn't always agree with me, but he always listened. He learned to be proud of his wife who had opinions, who had a rich inner world. We grew together, our love deepening into a true partnership. And now, all these years later, I am an old woman sitting here with this book in my hands. Frank has been gone for 10 years now, and I miss him every day. But the life we built together after that storm was a good one, a true one. This book, with its faded inscription, sits on my shelf, not as a reminder of a secret friendship, but as a testament to a life-changing one. The lesson in all this, my dear, is a quiet one. It's not about grand acts of rebellion. It's about the small, terrifying, and vital acts of courage required to be true to yourself. Sometimes, the most important battles are not fought on a field, but in a quiet living room, with the people you love. And true love, I have learned, is not about possession. It is not about demanding that someone be smaller, or quieter, or less than they are, so that you can feel more secure. True love makes space. It holds the window open and trusts that you will not fly away, but rather, that you will grow strong enough to fill the room with your own light. Isabella wished for me to find my own voice, and I did. It's not a loud voice. It's not an important voice, in the grand scheme of things, but it is mine, and I have tried to use it with kindness and with truth. That, I think, is the best any of us can hope for. Now, I shall put this book back on its shelf. Not on the top shelf, out of reach, but right here, at eye level, where I can see it every day. A reminder of a wonderful friend, and of the quiet, beautiful journey to becoming yourself.